The rain started suddenly as Mark slowed the car near the old lakeside inn, its wooden sign glowing softly through the mist, and Evelyn watched the drops slide down the window, feeling that strange mix of calm and tension that had followed them for months. Because this trip was meant to fix something neither of them could clearly name. They had been married for 15 years, shared a home, routines, memories, and quiet dinners, yet lately their life felt like a well-read book whose pages were still beautiful but predictable, and as they stepped inside the inn, shaking off the cold, warmth wrapped around them, soft lights, the smell of coffee, low music, and the feeling of being somewhere that didn't expect anything from them. At the far end of the lobby, near a stone fireplace, sat a younger couple, laughing in a way that was easy and natural, and Evelyn noticed them instantly, the way the young woman leaned toward the man as if the world ended at his shoulder, and the way he listened to her with full attention, not distracted, not tired, just present, and something gentle but sharp moved inside Evelyn's chest. Not jealousy, not sadness, just memory. Mark followed her gaze and saw it too. The reflection of a past version of themselves, when love felt light and every shared moment felt new. And for a second he wondered when exactly that feeling had become something they visited only in memory. Checking in was quick, and as they waited for the elevator, the younger couple joined them. Polite smiles exchanged at first, then small talk sparked by the storm, the kind of conversation people have when they know they will never meet again, except this time it flowed too easily, as if the night itself wanted them to speak. The younger man introduced himself as Jake, his voice relaxed and open, and the woman as Lily, her smile warm without effort, and Mark and Evelyn shared their names, laughing lightly when the elevator jolted, creating a small moment of shared surprise that broke any remaining distance. Upstairs, as they stepped out, Jake casually mentioned the lounge downstairs, how it was quiet on rainy nights, and without thinking too much, Mark heard himself agreeing to stop by later, surprising even Evelyn, who looked at him with raised brows before smiling, because maybe this trip was about saying yes to small things again. An hour later, the four of them sat together in the dim lounge, rain tapping the windows in a steady rhythm, drinks untouched as conversation moved fast and naturally, jumping from travel stories to favorite cities, from work frustrations to small dreams people rarely say out loud, and Evelyn found herself laughing more freely than she had in weeks, while Mark felt lighter, less aware of time, less burdened by the weight of expectations. Jake spoke about starting over in a new city, Lily about wanting a life that felt meaningful, not just busy, and Mark noticed how respectfully they listened when he and Evelyn spoke, how there was no awkwardness when he mentioned marriage, no tension when Evelyn talked about how life slowly changes without asking permission. The age difference faded into the background as the night moved forward, replaced by something more human, more shared, a sense that all four of them were standing at different points of the same road, curious about what came next. The lounge grew quieter as other guests left, and the storm outside deepened, making the space feel private, almost suspended from the world. And Evelyn felt a soft pull she couldn't fully explain, not toward anyone specific, but toward the feeling of being seen and understood without labels. Mark watched her speak, noticed the spark in her eyes, and instead of fear, he felt gratitude, because it reminded him that the woman he loved was still very much alive inside their shared life. When Jake suggested ordering one more round, more as an excuse to stay than to drink, no one objected, and as glasses clinked softly, Mark sensed that this night was already different, that it wasn't about crossing lines or chasing something reckless, but about opening a window they had unknowingly closed long ago. And as Evelyn met Lily's eyes across the table, sharing a quiet smile that held curiosity, warmth, and something unspoken, the rain continued to fall outside, unaware that inside the inn, four ordinary people had stepped into a moment that would gently shift how they remembered themselves. Long after the night was over, the lounge felt quieter as the night moved forward, the kind of silence that didn't push people apart but pulled them closer, and with each passing minute the four of them spoke more freely, not because of the drinks but because the air felt safe, and Mark found himself telling a story about his early days at work, how he once believed success would solve everything, while Evelyn added small details that made Jake and Lily laugh. And in that shared laughter something eased between Mark and Evelyn, a tension they hadn't named until it softened. Lily spoke next, her voice calm but honest, explaining how she feared rushing through life too fast, how she worried that growing older meant losing the excitement she felt now, and Evelyn listened closely, recognizing her younger self in Lily's words. Remembering nights when hope felt endless and choices felt wide open, Jake followed, talking about responsibility, about how love sometimes scared him because it meant being seen fully, and Mark nodded, understanding that fear well, realizing that age didn't erase uncertainty, it only changed its shape. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows like a steady heartbeat, and the fireplace cracked softly, creating a warmth that made the room feel smaller, more personal, as if the world beyond the glass had paused just for them. The conversation moved fast, jumping from past dreams to current doubts, from favorite songs to moments that quietly changed their lives, and no one interrupted, no one rushed to fill gaps, because even the pauses felt meaningful. Evelyn noticed how Lily's eyes softened when she spoke about Jake, not dramatic or loud, just steady. And it reminded her that love wasn't always about grand gestures but about showing up again and again. Mark watched Jake carefully, not with suspicion but curiosity, seeing a younger version of himself, full of hope yet unaware of how time would test that hope, and instead of envy, Mark felt a strange desire to protect that innocence, to let the young man know that love could survive change if treated with care. As the night deepened, the bartender cleaned glasses slowly, giving them space without words, and the room seemed to exist only for their shared stories, their quiet understanding. Evelyn spoke about the early years of her marriage, about passion and laughter and how life slowly became practical, not worse, just different, and as she spoke, she realized she wasn't sad, only reflective, and Lily reached out briefly, touching her arm in a simple, kind gesture that said more than words. Mark felt a shift then, not toward danger but toward honesty, realizing that this night was not about escaping his life but about seeing it more clearly through someone else's perspective. Jake admitted he admired the way Mark and Evelyn spoke to each other, the respect that remained even when things weren't perfect, and that comment landed softly but deeply, reminding them of a strength they often overlooked. Time passed unnoticed until the bartender announced last call, his voice gentle, almost apologetic, and no one moved at first, because the moment felt unfinished, like a sentence waiting for the right ending. Lily broke the silence with a quiet laugh, saying how strange it was that some nights felt bigger than the plans that led to them, and Evelyn agreed, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with connection. They ordered one last round, not to drink but to honor the moment, and as glasses touched lightly, Mark realized this night was reshaping something inside him, reminding him that intimacy didn't always mean touch, that closeness could exist in shared truths and mutual respect. The rain finally slowed, but no one noticed right away, because inside the lounge, four lives had crossed in a way that felt rare and honest, and as they sat there, voices low, eyes attentive, each of them understood, without needing to say it, that whatever happened next, this part of the night would stay with them, not as temptation, not as regret, but as a reminder that hearts don't stop growing just because time moves on. The fire burned lower as the night moved deeper, and without planning it, the four of them shifted closer, not touching but aware of each other's presence, as if the space between their chairs carried meaning of its own. And Mark noticed how the room felt different now, heavier with honesty yet lighter with understanding, while Evelyn felt a calm she hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes when you stop pretending everything is fine and realize that it actually can be. Jake leaned forward, listening carefully as Mark spoke about time, about how years pass quietly and suddenly you realize you've been busy surviving instead of living. And Lily watched Evelyn's face as she spoke about love changing shape, not fading but settling into something quieter, something deeper, and Lily understood that this was not a warning but a truth she would one day face herself. The conversation moved fast, almost urgent, as if the night knew it was limited, and they spoke about moments that stayed with them, first apartments, long drives with no destination, mistakes that taught hard lessons, choices that still echoed, and with every shared story, the distance between ages, experiences, and expectations faded further. The fire cracked softly, sparks lifting and disappearing, and that image stayed with Evelyn, because it felt like a mirror of the night itself, bright for a moment, then gone, but never meaningless. Mark caught Evelyn smiling in a way he hadn't seen in a long time, not because of excitement but because of recognition, and instead of fear, he felt relief, realizing that this night was not pulling her away from him but bringing her back to herself, and in doing so, back to them. Jake admitted that listening to Mark made him less afraid of the future, because it showed him that love didn't end when things became hard, it simply asked for patience, and Mark nodded, feeling a quiet pride, not in his mistakes, but in what he had learned from them. Lily spoke next, her voice steady, saying how she sometimes worried that passion would fade, that routine would steal the magic, and Evelyn answered honestly, telling her that magic doesn't disappear, it just asks to be noticed again. And Lily held on to those words as if they were something precious. For a moment, the lights flickered, plunging the lounge into a brief dim glow, and all four of them laughed together, the sound warm and natural, breaking the intensity and grounding them back in the present. And when the lights returned, something felt sealed, as if that shared laughter had marked the heart of the night. The bartender quietly stacked chairs nearby, signaling that time was moving forward, but still he didn't rush them, sensing perhaps that this was a moment meant to end gently, not abruptly. Mark felt a strange gratitude, not toward the couple specifically, but toward the chance to be open again, to speak without masks, and Evelyn felt the same, realizing that she hadn't needed excitement or escape, only connection and reflection. Lily stood first, stretching lightly, smiling as she thanked them for the conversation, and when she hugged Evelyn, it was brief and respectful but full of warmth. The kind that carries understanding without expectation. Jake shook Mark's hand, holding it a second longer than usual, not as a challenge, but as a silent acknowledgement of respect, and Mark returned it with a firm nod, knowing this moment would stay with him. As they walked toward the hallway, the fire finally dimmed to embers, and the lounge returned to quiet, but something invisible lingered, like a soft echo of shared words and understanding. Alone in the hallway, Mark and Evelyn paused outside their room, neither rushing to speak, both aware that something inside them had shifted, not broken, not crossed, just opened, and Evelyn finally said softly that the night had reminded her of who they were before life became heavy, and Mark answered that it had reminded him of who they still were. And as they closed the door behind them, the rain outside slowed, the storm passing quietly, leaving behind a calm that felt earned, and both couples, in separate rooms, lay awake longer than usual, not restless but thoughtful, knowing that this night was never about doing something bold or forbidden, but about feeling alive, seen, and understood in a way that would quietly follow them into whatever came next. Morning arrived softly, sunlight slipping through the curtains as if careful not to disturb what the night had left behind, and Mark woke first, listening to the quiet room, feeling rested in a way that surprised him, while Evelyn lay beside him, awake but peaceful, her thoughts already moving forward instead of backward. They dressed without hurry and stepped outside to the lakeside path, where the air smelled fresh and the water lay still, reflecting the sky like a promise. And as they walked, Evelyn spoke honestly, saying the night hadn't confused her but clarified her feelings, reminding her that love didn't vanish with time, it only waited for attention. And Mark agreed, admitting that seeing themselves through someone else's eyes had helped him appreciate what they had built instead of focusing on what had changed. Inside the dining room, they noticed Jake and Lily sitting near the window, laughing softly over breakfast, their energy bright but calm, and for a moment Mark and Evelyn watched without envy, only warmth, understanding that every stage of love carried its own beauty and its own lessons. When the four of them exchanged simple greetings, there was no awkwardness, only quiet respect, and Lily thanked Evelyn again for listening, saying the conversation had stayed with her, while Jake told Mark that hearing about marriage without false perfection had made him feel less afraid of the future, and Mark smiled, knowing that honesty was the best gift he could offer. They spoke briefly about the weather clearing, about travel plans, about ordinary things, and that felt right, because the night didn't need to be repeated or explained, it only needed to be remembered. As checkout time approached, the couples parted with warm smiles, no numbers exchanged, no promises hinted, because none were necessary. And as Mark and Evelyn loaded their bags into the car, Evelyn reached for Mark's hand, holding it with a firmness that spoke of choice, not habit. The drive home felt different, filled with easy conversation and thoughtful pauses, and Mark noticed how Evelyn leaned back, relaxed, as if something heavy had been set down, while Evelyn noticed how Mark looked at her more often, not searching for answers but appreciating presence. Miles passed, and with them came a quiet understanding that the night at the inn had not been an escape from reality but a return to it, a reminder that connection could be renewed through listening, openness, and respect elsewhere on the road. Jake and Lily drove in their own direction, talking about the future with a new depth, carrying lessons they hadn't expected to learn so soon, and though the couples would likely never meet again, the impact of that shared evening would remain, shaping small choices, softer words, and greater patience. As Mark and Evelyn reached home, unpacking felt lighter, ordinary life no longer dull but grounded, and Evelyn paused by the window, watching the afternoon sun, realizing that joy didn't always arrive loudly, sometimes it arrived quietly, through reflection and shared understanding. Mark wrapped an arm around her, not out of obligation but intention, and in that simple moment, the meaning of the night became clear, not excitement, not risk, but renewal. Time moved forward as it always does, but something lasting had been added, a gentle reminder that love grows not by chasing the past, but by honoring the present. And as life continued with its routines and responsibilities, Mark and Evelyn carried with them the quiet truth that some nights are meant not to change who you are, but to remind you of who you have always been.